You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Adler and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 576, our breakdown of The Temptation of the Force, which, again, is overdue. But Laura and I had a chance to talk about part one. We went through the first 37 chapters, I think, about a week ago. And so we're back to kind of wrap this book up and finally put a bow on what I've called the love boat. Because quite honestly, that's essentially what's happening here. But more on that in just a second. With me again is Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I mean, this has been a long time coming, so I am excited to kind of get to the end of Temptation of the Force and start looking forward to the next High Republic book that we're going to cover.
Yeah, and we'll talk about, where this book leaves off and maybe speculate on what we can expect to come in the final wave of Phase 3, which will start in 2025, of course. So before we get into all that, I just want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members. If you're not a member of Patreon, you can head out to cantinacast.com/Patreon. Sign up for as little as $2. And we've got a ton of shows and content out there for Patreon members exclusively. So please, we appreciate any and all donations, anything that you guys want to do to help contribute to the show. Please sign up for that. But I want to say also thank you to our now part of the tribe members on Patreon. And that's Alex, Raphael, Danny, Mike Borda, Lauren, hey, Dante, Riss Bayless, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh C., Jacob, and Rita Reborn. Also, our Delusions of Grandeur members, which are Rod Racing, CJ, Steve, and Daz. Again, thank you guys so much for your patronage. And if you're checking us out tonight on the live stream, you can head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube or youtube.com/cantinacast. Please like, subscribe, leave comments down below. All of that certainly helps to get into the algorithms, but honestly, we do love engaging with you guys, and you guys do a really good job of leaving comments for Lauren and I or whoever is on the shows, and we do try to interact as much as possible, so do that. Really would appreciate it. Want to hear your feedback. So if you're with us on the live version or the live recording tonight, feel free to throw comments in the chat, and we'll certainly get to those. Or if you guys, I'll try to highlight stuff as we go through it, and Lauren's going to keep tabs and do a nice little roll call here at the very end. With us already is One Up versus CPU. So thanks for joining. Appreciate you, man. Let's see. I'm gonna skip over what we got going on this week because we got a lot to talk about with all the rest of these chapters, and I want to just dive right into this. And I think so the way we kind of ended that first episode was we took everything pretty much up to the Battle of Naboo, which was pretty exciting. A lot of great stuff happened in that at the very end. There kind of culminates in it was kind of a nice bookend or book start, if you will, to all of these chapters, but before we get into chapter 38, I thought what we could do is just wrap up the Porter Ingle and Vice, however you want to pronounce it, their story, because it really is only 3 more chapters throughout the rest of the book that covers what's going on. And when we last left him, she had gotten away and he was going after her, right? He was trying to know more about her and try to get on, figure out where she was, coming from. And we pick up kind of right there. We find out that Porter follows her to a tiny little planet. I think it's called Isolot or Isolot. Islot? I don't know, something like that. Isolot? Sure. Let's go with that. We don't listen to audiobooks, so we just make stuff up all the time. But they're on Isolot, and he gets there, and she leaves him a little message that basically says, "Old man, I'll be waiting for you here." And it takes him to Isolot, which is the planet he ends up going to, right? He goes there, finds that she's got like some base that she's been operating or some kind of small base there. And he scopes it out for the first couple of days. He really doesn't attack. He's just kind of watching, making, keeping track of who's coming, who's going, what the perimeter defenses look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He ends up creating a bunch of explosives and then springs a trap or springs his own trap just a few days later, goes in, blows up some stuff. And they have kind of what their final confrontation for this book, at least. And in that moment, she feels pretty confident. Like, she tells all the Nihil. I mean, he goes and he kills a bunch of Nihil, of course, as he's moving his way through the base. And when he finally finds her, she's very much, I think, very confident and almost, very confident that she's going to be okay. And she tells all the Nihil to just head out, like, get out of here. I don't need you here. And of course they do. That fight seems a little bit more one-sided. We were talking before we came on the air. I think the fight from Edge of Dark or Eye of Darkness, that fight was a little bit more in favor of Vice, especially the way how it ended, and Porter just literally floating in space, almost dead. But there has been something about him in this book where he feels. We talked about this in the last episode, where he just feels more determined. This is his great will. He's kind of tuning out everything. I mean, he's so hyper focused on attacking her, that when they have this kind of final confrontation, it almost feels like it's very one-sided. Like it feels like Vice gets the crap beat out of her constantly, and she's on her back foot. And eventually she jumps into a ship, a little kind of personal starship, to get away. And by the way, I do want to mention too, one other thing that I thought was cool that I don't think we talked about last week, but throughout this book, we get to see Porter Engle use his lightsaber almost as his floating kind of entity, right? He uses it, he'll hold it in his hand, and he, of course, does all the stuff that we would expect from a Jedi, but he's able to make this sucker float around him at all times and flies it at people and attacks stuff and then pulls it back. And we got to see a great example of this because as she was jumping into that personal starship, he ends up sending his lightsaber into the engines, destroys the engines, and he has this moment where he's about to, my interpretation was it seemed like he was going to go for the killing blow, right? Because she was in that ship. Her ship was almost disabled at this point. And he decides he's about to do it when suddenly she yells out, "Stop, I know where your sister is." And that sends him, which was like a really climactic moment, because if you know anything about this character, he thought his sister had been dead. They had met. Vice was right there when all three of them met originally, way back in when we first covered that in the comic book. But he had such a close relationship with his sister, who was named Barash. Of course, that's where we get the Barash vow from. And I was completely floored, was not expecting her to kind of throw this, but it also floored him because, I mean, he falls to his knees. He's basically immobilized and paralyzed by the news that he just heard. And that was enough information, or at least it did enough for Vice to get away. So that's really how it wraps up. Now, the question I have for you, Lauren, is number one, I guess overall feedback or initial, I guess your thoughts on the fight and just the relationship between these two. But then, do you believe her? Is there any reason to doubt her that she actually does know where Barash is at?
Well, the fight taking place over these 3 chapters, it was driving me a little insane because I want him to finish her off so bad, and that we don't get to see that in this book, so that sucks.
Yeah.
So I was a little like, oh my gosh, how long is this going to go on for? But I mean, it makes sense because they are so well matched that I think it's going to take something crazy like Barash maybe to actually finish this once and for all. So it makes sense why it took so long, but man, I just want to be done with her so bad. With Vice, not Barash.
Right,
obviously.
exactly.
I want to be done with Vice so bad. But anyway, so that had me going, just wanting to see how it would all play out. But with Vice claiming that she knows where Barash is, I feel like she is telling the truth because that would be an insane piece of information to not deliver on. Like, that's a pretty big claim to make. I mean, what is she going to say? Just like, oh, never mind. Actually, that was a
Right.
complete cowardly lie. Like, I mean, even though Vice is like a huge slime ball, I do think she at least cares about saving face. So, I mean, it probably hurt her ego that she ran away and then said this insane thing to catch him off guard instead of actually defeating him in combat. Like, she wasn't able to do that this time.
Yeah.
So I think she probably is telling the truth because I don't think that she would have played that card unless she felt like she had to. And also, I don't think she would have played it if she didn't have anything to deliver on it.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, like, we can't put anything above her, like, right? She would do just about anything to win. And I think he would too, quite honestly. I think they're both at the same level now where whatever it takes to kill that other person, they've been going at this for years, almost literally hundreds of years now, right? This battle, the ebb and flow of their battle going back and forth. I wouldn't put it past her to kind of say something like that. And that, I mean, if she was lying, it certainly had the impact that she was expecting because it completely stopped him and gave her enough time to get away. But I think just from a narrative perspective, I think it makes the most sense that she is alive. She is telling the truth. Now, I've got a lot of questions about where could she possibly be? How does Vice know? Is she a prisoner of Vice? I think a lot of this stuff will probably get explored either in the next adult novel, or maybe we get a spinoff, or maybe it's a comic. I'd love to see it back in comic book form, the way we kind of got the original story, which is the Blade of Bordata.
That's
That
what
would be
I
really
think is going to happen. Is
Yeah.
comic, yeah.
And it would be great. I'd love to see it. So it was a great way to end it, and I think it wraps up. I mean, that whole storyline wraps up by chapter 54. It's kind of drawn out, and it's kind of scattered through the rest of the book. But by chapter 54, that's the last of it. So, One Up versus CPU says, wasn't she human? I don't know if you're talking about Vice or Barrage.
I think Barrage.
Barrage she was like Cage or Kagi.
Oh,
I
you
don't
know what?
how
I
they
think
pronounce
you're
it.
right. I think she was Cage. I know she's
Yeah.
not human. She's just a species that looks very similar to
Yeah.
human, but not quite. Like,
Yeah.
I think she has green eyes.
She
Like,
has
even
and
like,
I thought green hair too. If I remember, I can't remember the comic book. I know she was a
Yeah.
Cage species, but I don't know anything about how long they live or anything about the species. Quite honestly, there's so many of them. If
Yeah.
you're talking about Vice, I think she's a Maryland, so
mhm.
we know they live a pretty long time now that the Acolyte has come out. So at least confirmed, anyways. But anyways, I know he just chimed in. She was Cage. So yeah, great little story. Great way to wrap that up. Exciting to see where that story goes, when they should pick it up. So, all right, let's go back to kind of the main story, I guess, of the rest of the story. And this involves Marchion Row, the Nihil, the Drengir, the Nameless, and then everything that's going on back on Coruscant. And just as a reminder, the storm wall had come down. Marchion Row changed the home path with one that he had tattooed on his body. And we're starting to see the effects of that almost immediately. Like, comms are cut off because they can't communicate to the storm wall now because the home code's changed and people are freaking out. Storm wall is back up. And really at this point, the only way they have to kind of come and go is going to have to be through Avar, Kriss, or Vanestra Row. They're the only two that can do it without the home key, or the home code. Or home
And
key,
because they
however.
left the Sunveil device on the other side of the storm
yeah,
wall. So
right.
that
It
was
already
like
took off.
another wrench that was thrown into it. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I remember when I read that and I was like, oh, dang it. That was very short-sighted, but
Not very wise.
yeah.
Seems like they would have been like, let's get a couple of these just in case.
Yep. This will make a couple of them. Although they do come up with an idea, right? I think Vern and Xylan then come up with a plan to kind of fake a path engine. They steal the one off the track, or the Precipitate Fire, which is Vice's flagship, and they come up with a way to at least try to create another one. And there was an
That
interesting
actually-
part too. You go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you, do you find all of this hard to keep up with? Like, there's the Sunveil device, and then we have a
Yes.
fake Sunveil device. And then we have also, if you don't have the Sunveil device, it's okay. You just have to be really good at, like, typing numbers. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I honestly, I gave up trying to make sense of all this. I'm like, okay, let's just go, right? Whatever they say, I'm just taking it at face value, and we're just going to roll with it, because trying to make sense of it all, like, it's just, I don't have the time to spend there and kind of break it all down. But yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
It gets a little complex. I just kind of go, oh, they got another way to get through it? Okay, let's go. Let's figure that. Let's go with that and see what happens now. But I couldn't, there's so many variables and things they're saying about, references to other books that I'd have to go back and reread and catch up on. So I'm just like, yeah, whatever.
Thankfully, they make it to where if you don't understand, like, because I did the same thing. I was like, I'm just going to go with it because, I mean, there's too much math and, like, if this, then this scenarios
Exactly.
involved.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm just going to go with it. But thankfully, I feel like the way that it's written, you're able to at least just kind of
Yep.
take it and then just roll with it. So I'm glad it's not just me, though, that found this to be, like, a little bit much to try to keep straight.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point, because at no point did I feel like I had to go back. I had to go back and reread things to truly understand it. There was enough for me to just kind of pick it up and go and run with it and be just totally fine with it.
Mm-hmm.
Slarf is in the chat. Says Porter Engel became one of my favorites from this novel. I would agree. He has a lot of great moments. 9-egg soup, always a plus. This is when he made the soup after the Battle of Naboo and told it to feed everybody. Which I don't think we mentioned in the last episode, but that's all right. Okay, let's from here. There was another moment too that was kind of shocking. This is when Xylan he took Carr and, like, forced him to go, and then later on he, like, locks him up on one of the ships because he doesn't want him to leave. which I thought was they've got a very interesting relationship, for lack of a better term. It's almost hard to kind of see. Like, I'm hoping at some point we get to see the sweeter side of them come together. But right now, Carr is so like focused on he wants to be part of this, the Republic, and he wants to help people. And Xylan's, of course, just thinking about himself and his luggage and his hair and his looks and stuff. It's hard to see where these guys, do kind of come together. They kind of have a couple moments a little bit later, but just kind of thoughts on their relationship, because we're probably not going to talk much about them at this point from here on out.
Yeah, I think that was it Defy the Storm? I'm looking at
She's
Defy
checking
the
it.
Storm. Okay, these titles are also similar. I had to actually look at the book. In Defy the Storm, the YA novel, I feel like we do get to get a little bit more insight into their relationship, but I agree that we don't really see a lot of like what brought them together or what, because I mean, yeah, in this book we just see that Xylan is so desperate to get Care out of there that he kidnaps Care. So
Yeah,
I mean,
kidnaps his own husband. Yeah.
yeah, not really a great start to things, but
Yeah, and he tells
I
him, "Hey, you know what you got into
sympathize.
when you married me, dude." So
Yeah, but also though, I mean, I might sound a little crazy. I do kind of sympathize a little bit with where Xylan is coming from, because imagine like trying to talk to Care during this and he's like, "No, I have to stay and help people." And it's like, the Nihil are coming. They just almost killed my dog, which happened earlier in the book.
yeah,
Like, we need to leave, So I kind
right.
of get why Xylan is feeling desperate, but obviously kidnapping someone is never okay.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the extreme.
Yeah.
Talk about codependency.
Right.
One real quick, one I was chiming in. He says basically you can get through with a Jedi or Path engine. The Sunveil device doesn't work because it uses Xylan's old codes. Yeah, I got that much. I don't know why the Jedi cheat code works if it uses the same codes. Yeah, I think that was always the X factor. I think the Jedi cheat code was just kind of like the Force itself. There was something that they've never really truly explained, and I'm okay with that. Like, especially since it's just two Jedi and two very powerful Jedi at that. I think that makes sense and is totally cool at that point. Let's see. Riley. Hey, Riley. Hi. She says hi. Let's talk about into chapter. We're kind of around chapter 41 at this point. So the Jedi leave some RDC forces on Naboo. Avar and Vern get through them again. They end up. Burry and Master Lox and Padawan Amadeo. They all are still stuck there on Naboo before they end up taking off. We get to the third horizon, and Vern and Burry are then called to speak to the council about killing Namus. This is a great little moment here where they finally kind of got a chance to talk and explain what exactly happened. And you could tell Burry was really struggling with it. He wasn't sure what to say because he couldn't even make sense of why he was able to do some of the things that he did. But Burry does tell him about the Blight. And they do mention that they are going to send some Jedi to go look for the great progenitor. So I love that thread has been picked up. You and I talked about it in the last episode a little bit, but throughout the rest of this book, we do get a sense that, okay, that the great progenitor is probably on the loose. Went down with Starlight Beacon, likely was down there in the ocean of Iram. So it sounds like we're probably going to see more of that here in, again, comic book, maybe in the main title of the High Republic, since we got to see a lot of the progenitor in that one, or maybe it makes its way into the adult novel. I don't know, but it is nice that they've kind of picked up that thread here.
Yeah, I could definitely see it coming back in the comic, especially since that was kind of already established there to begin with. I feel like that's the most likely place we'll see it, but it's always nice when we get a little bit more explanation in the novels that we don't always get in comics just because of the nature of the medium. So
Yeah, right.
I'm kind of hoping we get it in both.
Yep. In chapter 44, we're on Coruscant, and this is where Elzar and So are meeting with Garrus Starros. Again, this is after the Stormwall has gone back up now. I loved his line here. He says, "I'm incredibly excited for this dinner. It's going to be fun and carefree, and nothing dreadful could possibly come of it." I mean, just seeped in sarcasm the entire time. And I love that So was like, or Lena So was kind of like, yeah, I totally am feeling the same way. I do not want to do this. But they were just kind of, placating her, entertaining her, I guess.
Why do you think Lena So does this, though?
I don't know.
Why does she have to meet with Gira?
I think on one hand, I think she's trying to, I think she's hopeful that at some point Gira Starros is going to come around, which she kind of does, not because of what Lena So does, but because of her daughter and Elzar Mann's efforts. But I think in Lena So's mind, it's like, okay, she was maybe a good person, or at least she was part of the Republic. I can get through to her. Maybe we can reason with her, and she's just kind of delusional right now. But if we can get through to her and make her understand that, like, you're basically part of a terrorist group, right? There's no sovereign nation or sovereign entity here. This is really just a bunch of terrorists that are doing horrible and vile acts, literally on live television, if you will. And so I think that's why she's doing it. At the same time, if there's an opportunity for peace and it doesn't require her a whole lot of, legwork, which really is just kind of having dinners and doing the stuff that she would normally do as part of bureaucracy, I think she's probably okay with it. She'll go through the notions, but we can tell, and she's very open about how much she hates it and she doesn't like the situation she's in. But I think that's probably why. Because I'm with you. Like, if it were me, I would have shut her off already and said, "Don't ever come to Coruscant. We're at war," kind of thing. But she's a better person than I am, I guess.
Yeah, she's like the leader of an enemy state, so it just seems weird to have this strange dinner. But I mean, maybe she feels like she doesn't have any other options, though. That was how I was trying to make sense of it. Because Lena So for a while didn't really have any options. It's really only very recently that she's starting to make progress. So maybe she's just kind of like, I might as well try to talk to her since I can't do anything else.
Yeah, it's part of it, I think. But so they go ahead and have their little meeting there. I thought it was very big of So to say, look, I'm never going to give up, or she says, I won't give up Gira's daughter for her son. And Elzar takes note of that a little bit later, right? He knows that, like, wow, she's really in this. She's committed because she knows her son's behind the occlusion zone or in the occlusion zone. And as much as she wants and loves her son to come back, she's not willing to sacrifice. She's willing to give that up for the greater good, which says a lot about her character. And I think Gira sees that as well. Like, they don't really mention it, but I think that's one of the turning points. I think this is where she finally something starts to change for Gira just a little bit. But Gira does say that she will look for him in the occlusion zone. She at least commits to that much. But the overall gist of this conversation is they want to hear from Marchion Ro, right? They're tired of Gira Staros kind of being the liaison and the voice and just relaying information to them. They actually want to hear from Marchion Ro himself. And they do eventually by the end of the book. But I don't know. Any thoughts on this before we move into kind of Ro, and then we'll get into Oana, what's going on that planet again?
They better be careful what they wish for. Wanting to hear from Marchion Ro, like, he can't just have a normal conversation.
No. Yeah. He's a psychopath.
Yeah.
And I do love the way the book ended on that note, which we'll get to here eventually. But okay, so very quickly, for Marchion Ro, throughout most of this, until we get to Zeroseph 1, or whatever the name of the planet is, I forget the name of it. We'll get to it in a second. But before we get to that planet, he's pretty much just going through what he was doing when we last left off. He's going through experiments. He's trying to test out what happens when, things cross the blight. But he takes it a little bit further now. Eventually, and I'm going to just kind of cover a couple of different chapters here with him, he's able to use the rod and walk on top of the blight, walk through the blight. So there is something about the rod itself that is able to kind of, mitigate the effects of the blight. Make him invincible in some ways to the blight itself. I mean, at one point, he takes his shoes off, walks through it barefoot, and then grabs, some of the blight with his toes and lifts it up. So it does feel like that rod is pretty powerful. And even the nameless that are with him, right? The nameless that are with him that are part of him, they're not impacted as well. They're able to traverse across the blight on top of that. So I don't know and we can talk about Marta as well, because she's part of all this as well. I mean, she seems to be pretty excited about, number one, the fact that they have this as a weapon. Two, that there's always an opportunity to kill Jedi with the nameless, which she's all about, to be honest. But any thoughts around what Marchion Ro is doing? Because that's pretty much what happens until, again, we get to the planet where they finally all meet up and have their battle.
Well, so, okay. The part with the name...
Vixoseph 1, sorry.
What was that?
Vixoseph 1 is the planet.
Oh, yep. Okay. So part of my confusion about this is that with the nameless, okay, so when he has the rod, the nameless are also not affected by the blight. But at first, I was interpreting this as, and I kind of went back and forth on what exactly I thought, and that might have been intentional because we haven't really had this like fully explained yet, but I thought that the nameless were immune to the blight anyway. Is that not what you got from that?
I think so, because remember the egg, it kind of went around the egg at one point.
Yeah.
And I kind of interpret that as, okay, they're not impacted by it. But the only thing that made me doubt that was the fact that whenever they got close to it, they were kind of freaking out. Remember, they didn't want to go and they were kind of backing up. They didn't want to go anywhere near it. I took that as like, hey, maybe there is something about it that eventually does kind of permeate into them or impact them in some way. But I think you're right. I mean, so far we don't have any reason to believe that it definitely has an impact, but they were scared of it. So I took it to that.
Like they're scared of it, but maybe it doesn't actually kill them, but maybe they're scared of it because of what it does to everything else.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So I don't know, trying to figure out how exactly the rod could protect Markion from the blight and also control the nameless. I mean, and the fact that the blight looks kind of like the effect that what the nameless does. I mean, these things have to be connected in some way.
Yeah.
I hope we find out how soon.
Yeah. I think we were kind of talking about, I think One Up was talking about it with us last time too. It feels like all of this leads back to Planet X and that home planet. Because remember later on too, the blight, I think it's Buryaga, when he kind of connects with it and feels it, he feels that it's homesick. So maybe there is some connection to that planet as well. So eventually they've got to wrap all this up, but I think you're right. I think they're all roads lead there in some way.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, trying to get all of, I don't know, it seems like we're still kind of uncovering how exactly the blight works. So when we see these things kind of happen without a full explanation, it feels like we're kind of hunting for clues right now about what exactly it's going to be like. So like at the end of the book, I still was left with a question about the note that we end on with the blight, which we'll get to. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of ambiguity around it right now.
Yeah. And that continues to be the case, I think, on purpose. But I imagine the fact that we're going into wave 3 of phase 3, it's time to like just come out with all the answers, right?
Yeah.
So
that's what I'm a little concerned about. But
Millennium Workshop says, good evening, everyone. Hey, buddy. Thanks for joining the show. Hopefully you're caught up on High Republic. If not, just listen. We'll cover it for you. One Up says, I just saw it as they were scared of it because it had no force left. I mean, the ashes. Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
I can see that interpretation. Skywalker's Academy, hello there. Welcome, sir. Welcome to the show. Okay, let's see. We were talking about the meeting that they just had. We talked about Markion Row, everything going. Let's go back to Oana. So we're on chapter 46 now. This is where Burry and Bell, they're called back to the Ilion colony. So remember, these are these creatures that use these trees as kind of like birthing pods of sorts, right? They've got this symbiotic relationship with trees. We caught up with them very, very early on in this book, and so they end up getting called back. And the entire time, Burry's having a really difficult time to shake what's happened to him after he encountered the Nameless on Naboo. There was a disturbing moment there where he said, he wanted to pull his fur out again and again for no reason other than how it felt. Like he's having like this traumatic experience where he's suddenly yanking out his Wookiee fur. So it didn't really come back up again. I mean, we know it had an impact on him, and of course it would impact him as an empath more than anybody else, and especially with what he did in channeling that fear. But it's kind of sad because, I mean, this is a different look. I mean, not literally, but figuratively, Burry's always been the really happy one. He was in the really tiny kids, book that they did with the High Republic. But to see him suffering and going through so much pain through this book was kind of disturbing to read about, I guess.
I mean, it seems like the fact that he's so powerless to actually do anything about all of the suffering that he's seeing is really taking a toll on him, because I feel like I was getting the sense that if he was able to do something, then, maybe it wouldn't be quite as overwhelming as it is when he feels like he just has no power over the situation at all.
Yeah. And of course, when they get there, the reason they were called back to Oan or Oani, whatever it's called, the reason they were called back is because those, birthing trees or pod trees or whatever they were suddenly impacted by the blight as well. And so they had called the Jedi back to figure out what was going on. And the outside of what happens here, I have a feeling we're going to probably come back to this because it feels like they can do a lot of research here with this group. But at one point, Buryaga jumps off one of the skiffs that are out there, and he lands right in front of the blight, and he has a moment of like, I don't even know. I think it was like 5 hours of meditation where he was using the Force and able to push the blight away. Not very much. But he was able to kind of push it back. So it was a sign of at least progress. And I think at one point he starts hypothesizing that maybe if we had the entire Jedi Order down here, that we could maybe make an impact on this one part of the Blight. But to turn the Blight around completely with the Force was just insurmountable. There's no way they would be able to do that. So it is an interesting observation, though.
And even the very, very small amount of progress that he makes, it takes everything out of him.
Yeah.
And he
drained
barely
completely.
even makes a dent. So it's
Yep.
like, and Bella even is like, you gotta stop. Like, you cannot do that again because you could die if you do that again.
Yeah, he was pretty hyper focused on trying to make sure he was trying to have an impact on it in some way, connect with it. All right, we get to chapter 47. This is a very interesting chapter because this is where Yoda and Elzar finally walk. They have a talk together, and Elzar does two things. Number one, he tells Yoda, I don't want to be part of the council. I really appreciate the offer, but my place is out here on the front lines. And of course, we all know it's really just him wanting to be with Avar, because at this point now, he's committed. Like the last time they left talking about each other, Avar said, I love you. He did not say that back to her. He walked away, and he's been struggling with that ever since. And now he's getting to the point where he's like, no, I do love her. But he does confide in Yoda outside of telling him, look, I'm not going to join the council. He does confide in Yoda and tells Yoda that, hey, Avar Kriss said that she loved me. And then I'm going to read what he ends up asking Yoda. And I kind of want your thoughts on this because it plays into a lot of what we talked about in terms of attachments last episode. But he says, Master Yoda, do you think it's possible to be free of attachment, to be pure of the Force, but also to love an individual? And then Yoda says, some beings think love is a connection. Love is recognizing you and me in the whole galaxy. To name a thing is to love it. Some teachings say others that love is vulnerability or a natural bodily need. And then Yoda says, what the real answer is, I do not know. But if you find your answer for yourself and it opens the Force to you more widely, brings you closer to the light, then wrong you cannot be. And then he goes on. Let me pause there because it does sound like Yoda is like, yeah, it's totally fine. Like as long as, if you fall in love with somebody and you have these feelings, he doesn't really use the word attachment, right? But he says, as long as you have these feelings for somebody else and it brings you closer to the light, then, how can that be wrong? That seems different than what he preaches later down the road.
Yes. And also something else too is that, so what Yoda's talking about here as a concept, I do think that that's sound. Like he's like, yes, it is possible to love someone without attachment. Like he's kind of saying yes to Elzar's question. But I think the thing that is being left out of their conversation is that the reason for the teaching and the rule of not having attachment is that it is super, super hard to love someone without having an attachment to them. Like I think to accomplish that, you have to be like super, super advanced in your like spiritual journey to be able to do that. And it's not something that most people ever get to that place. So I think that's the reason for don't fall in love, because for 99% of people, attachment is coming with that. And I don't think Yoda really explains that in this conversation. Because theoretically, yeah, you could love someone without attachment. I mean, if you're able to let them go when it's time to let them go. But most people can't do that. So that's the reason for the teaching. So I don't know. I feel like Yoda kind of missed a part of that. Because there's no way that Yoda doesn't recognize that. Yeah.
No, I agree.
I don't know.
He's probably talking about it maybe from a high level concept and not his exact kind of situation, or speaking to the specifics of his situation. There is another part here that kind of follows up on that one. He asks Yoda, do you love? And Yoda says, always. And then he says, for you, a question I have in return. Do you think your parents loved you less because they sent you to the Jedi Temple? Elzar says, no. Yoda says, why? And then Elzar says, because it was my destiny. I was born with Force potential, and they wanted what was best for me. And then Yoda responds back, even without you in their lives, and knowing you would grow without holding on to their names. And this is where Elzar says, they let me go. They loved me and let me pass through their lives, through their love. They didn't hold on to me, even if they were attached to, even if they ached to or not. So I guess, the lesson here around at least the parents is like, yeah, there are, that is a different. Here's where I would kind of counter argue to what Yoda's saying is like that's a different kind of love, in my opinion, right? That's a father
Mm-hmm.
or parents and children love. It's very different, right? Because they'll always put. Well, I shouldn't say that, but generally speaking, parents will try to put the children first. I don't know that that
Mm-hmm.
happens in a romantic relationship where attachments are, right? They're not going to put the other person first. Now, we see examples of that in this book where I think Elzar's saying the right things and, well, Avar doesn't say the right things, but Elzar's saying the right things and thinking the right things. But I just don't know that that's going to be enough to sustain and they're going to be able to kind of carry on with that, long term. It seems like it's going to be very short lived in that way.
So, question for you: was your interpretation of this that either kind of like what I was saying, where I think Yoda left a piece out of the conversation, or do you think that Yoda's opinion on this is going to actually change by the time we get to the prequel era?
I have a feeling I can see it both ways, but right now I'm kind of leaning towards it's probably going to change by the time we get to the prequel era. Yeah,
Mm,
I think
okay.
I think he's probably thinking, hey, I've been around for 900 years now, and I mean, we only know the part of what happened during phase two or phase two and phase three, right? And phase one, of course. So I think during that time, pretty much a period of peace, prosperity, love, all that stuff. And so I think he's probably okay with it all. But I don't know that he's actually seen anything in his timeline that has made him think like, whoa, no, this is actually not a way to go. Like everything so far has turned out okay. And people have done some bad things and people have gone to the dark, but they've always come back and has never been a problem. I don't know that that's going to be the case by the time we get out of phase three. I have a feeling something's going to happen. It's probably going to involve Elzar Mann, Avar
Yeah, that's
Kriss.
what I was about to
I
say.
I theorized last week on the show that it was likely going to be a situation where Avar dies, and Elzar just jumps into the dark side because he jumps into the dark side again a little bit later. We're going to see him. He goes back there, and Avar is able to pull him back. And so I think a lot of their relationship works right now. But the minute you remove one of them, because I can see this going the other way too. Like maybe maybe Elzar Mann is suddenly lost, and Avar then goes too far. I mean, we have no reason to truly believe that right now because she's been pretty steady and steadfast about what she believes in, and she is the light, the embodiment of the light at this point for the books. But I could see it going both ways, where as soon as something happens to one or the other, they're lost because Stellan's gone as well, right? So it's a very rocky kind of relationship it feels like it's destined to fail. But where are you standing now? Do you think it's going to be that as well? Do you think something's going to happen here?
I think maybe a combination of the two. I think that Yoda didn't fully explain to Elzar the reason for the whole no attachment thing. I think he kind of left that part out because there's no way that he doesn't at least have some sort of knowledge of why is it that we teach no attachments. Why is it that Elzar feels like this is against the rules? There's a reason for that. But I do also think something's going to happen, and I think it's going to be Elzar. So
Yeah. And to be clear and to be fair, they have been preaching no attachments throughout all of phase two or all of the High Republic, right? That's never changed, but they've been way more lenient about it. They've been very lenient about relationships and love and that sort of thing. And so I think that's where they're kind of like, yeah, it's okay, right? Nothing's ever bad has happened since then, and it's a different time. We're not at war. There are no Sith, so sure, we can allow things to kind of be more lenient. But I don't think they've had a relationship. I don't think they've had anything. I suspect they won't have anything like they will have with Avar and Elzar in the end of phase three. So, all right. Let's the very last part of this chapter here is where Elzar asks Avon for help, and to kind of cut to the chase, he basically wants her to go confront Gyrostaros and ask Gyrostaros for information on where they can find Marchion Ro. This comes up a little bit later in the next chapter where Avon goes, is chapter 48, where Avon goes and she visits with Gira. It starts off really good, positively, and then by the end it just starts to kind of fall apart, right? You can tell these two are definitely still have a lot of problems between them, and rightfully so. But I felt like in this chapter we got more of what Gira wants. I know you've been asking that since the very beginning. What does she want? What is she striving for? And she says she wants the right thing to keep her family safe, to keep my people, the entire Hosnian system safe. I will accumulate enough power so that no one can take that away, so that I can protect what is mine, you, Hosnian. So Is it fair to say that what she wants is her daughter?
Yeah, I do think that the way I interpreted this, and I feel like getting to see them actually talk to each other about it, it finally sold me on what her motivations are because they'd been mentioned before, but I just kind of wasn't buying it until now because to me, they didn't seem like like what I had heard and read didn't seem to justify how extreme her actions are. But now I really feel like I'm sold because what I got out of this chapter is that Gira has like a desperation to protect Avon and give Avon everything, even if Avon doesn't even want it. But she just feels like she needs to provide everything that she can for Avon and for like their family.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I buy it now because it does seem to be like a kind of unrealistic desperation that she has, which I can see how that would lead her to align herself with some psychos.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest psycho in the entire galaxy, to be clear.
Yeah.
My Star Wars guys popped in and says, hey, just popping in for a second. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate the drive-by. So she does. Avon tells her, look, they want to know where Ro's at. And, eventually she does. She actually gives up the location of Ro, which leads us to the big confrontation at the very end of this book. So back on Coruscant, Avar is kind of inquiring Carr about the blight, right, because that impacted his hand at some point. Carr does show Avar the planet that they found it on. He says the blight didn't hurt when it got on his hand. It didn't even itch. I thought that was kind of interesting. Nice little, just more context about what's going on with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then together they kind of they eventually kind of track down where, they trace where Markion Ro has been, what planets he's been on. They know there's some kind of a link there between the Drengir and what planets they've been on. And they kind of narrow it down to 2 different planets. And eventually they just kind of pick one and they decide that they're going to head back into the occlusion zone because they want to investigate where they think Markion will be going forward. So that's where they leave off there. One up for CPU says she just wants what's best for her family, even at the expense of the rest of the galaxy. Yeah, I think that's been made clear now, at least finally. There was a part of me that just always felt like it was just about power, and that's why I really hated her. But I think she does. I'm not going to say she's been redeemed by any means because she's still kind of slimy, even at the very end of this when Markion Ro shows up. But I think first and foremost, yeah, I would agree it is her family.
Yeah. Well, my issue was like, okay, if it's all about power, why is she so obsessed with power? Like, there had to be a reason behind that. Like it just felt too easy. So I'm glad that we finally got that reason.
Eventually, Burry makes his way back to Coruscant, and at some point he teaches Jedi Master Lox and his Padawan, Amadeo. He kind of shares what he went through with all of the Jedi that are still kind of on this mission, and in hopes that maybe they'll be able to kind of, filter and see past the fear that overwhelms them whenever the Nameless are around. And I think that kind of does work a little bit later. I think it's Elzar who kind of demonstrates some of that. But Avon eventually comes over. She hands Elzar kind of a data stick, memory stick of sorts, and it's got some information on where Ro is going to be. And then she leaves. And I asked a question in here about whether or not she was gone for good. Like, it did seem like she was done. She was going to leave Coruscant. And then I thought, well, where's she going to go? Like, is she going to go back to her mom? That didn't seem like the more logical place to go. I don't know where she would go at this point, but it felt like she was at least walking away from Coruscant and walking away from the protection that the Jedi Order and the Republic have been giving her. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird because, so she got what she asked for from Gira, but to me, that does not mean that Gira is changing because, this piece of information that Gira gave up, it was kind of a convenient thing for her to let go of. She's tired of Markion. So,
right.
And Avon probably knows that Gira, can never really fully be trusted. So I doubt that she's going back to Gira just after this one conversation. But I almost wonder if maybe she's going to stay on Coruscant, but she's just not going to be helping them anymore. She's just kind of like, my work here is done. I've given you everything I can. So I'm going to go back to school now and just focus on my own studies and my own stuff that I want to do with my life.
Yeah. Yeah. One I brought her up too. I forgot to mention that she did there was a hooded figure they mentioned, which is Diva, but where they go, I don't know at this point, I guess, is the bigger question. So, He says off to Planet X, of course. Everybody's going to go back to Planet X. Eventually, we're all going to be there. It feels like
somebody's going to have to get there at some point.
Yeah, some point.
We need to get the show on the road.
But so Elzar, Avar, Burry, Bell, Vern, everybody, Amadeo, everyone, they all get on the Axiom or one of the ships, I forget now, and they head out to Vixoseph 1, which is kind of where everything is finally culminating. Now, before they do, we get into the really, really spicy chapter. This is chapter 53. And I mean, it starts off already like Elzar Mann is waiting for Avar Kriss in her quarters, like on her bed. And I'm thinking, okay, I mean,
these people are a couple of dum-dums. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have you tease that out a little bit more here in just a second. But Elzar, before they get into, I guess, the foreplay of things, he does say that he's thinking about giving Elzar's thinking about giving Stellan's lightsaber to Vern, which doesn't happen in this book, but I thought that was really cool. I'd love to see her wield that thing, although it's a huge lightsaber and she's not the biggest person in the world. But it is nice. And we've seen this before where, when a master dies, their Padawans are handed their lightsabers and they carry them around like symbolically. I mean, Stellan Gios was doing the same thing for a while there. But all right, but more into like what's really happening in this chapter. And Elzar basically tells Avar that he wants to be with her. And then he goes on to try to explain it. And he says, at first I thought it's to make up for Stellan being gone, but that isn't how the Force works. It doesn't replace or exchange. It flows, it fills. So maybe we're needed like this, he said, together. The Force needs something from us. Of course it does, but maybe it needs us together for it, is kind of the response here. So I did find it weird, and again, more fatalistic. We talked about this. It does feel like they talk very much like teenagers when they're confessing how they feel about each other. It's a lot of really, really sappy romantic love, and I don't think that's necessarily a knock on the writing. I think my theory was that, look, these guys have never been in relationships, and they're in their 20s, and here they are now finally getting to let loose, and they're going through what we all went through when we were 13 and 14 and writing love letters and saying really hokey dokey stuff. This is just what they do at this point. And so I think some of that is that, but he does say like, he's almost like saying, oh, it's our destiny, right? Love has brought us together to fulfill something. Like we're meant to be together because we're going to do something together. And I thought that might be true, but it could go in a horrible way. It could be something the Force might have brought them together in a good way or a bad way, depending on how you want to look at it.
It could be a lesson that they have to learn the hard way.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also they kind of just like the drama of it all. Like, I think maybe that's part of what's behind all these grandiose statements that they're making is they're kind of leaning into the drama that they're creating. Because, I mean, some of the stuff that I'm reading and like the explanations that they're saying to each other about why they think this is fine and not dangerous. I mean, to me, they just sound kind of delusional at times.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree at all. I would agree 100%. They kiss each other a lot, and it's not like, little pecks and stuff. I mean, they're kissing. They end up going like down to the ground, or I guess the floor at one point together. And, they're confessing to each other how much they love each other. And I think it's Elzar that, he asked, can we do this? Like what they're about to do. He says, can we choose this and never let it become selfish or dangerous?
Famous last words right there.
Yeah, I read that and I'm like, well, there you go. I don't know how
it's over. Yeah,
it's over. I mean, they might do a pretty good job here. They do a noble job, I think, throughout the rest of this book, but it's just a matter of time, folks. And then the last line, which is always, I don't know, I could say it was the corniest line, but it was very like romance novel kind of stuff. But I think it's Avar says, do you know what the Jedi teach about choosing the light? It takes practice. The light, what she's referring to is them having sex. And she says it takes practice. Elzar responds back with, I like practice. And then this
is what I mean by these are a couple of dum-dums. They're just telling each other what they want to hear right now. To get what they want to get. It is not about the Force anymore.
Nope.
I'm like, they're just saying this like Force language because they're like, yeah, we're Jedi. It's cool. It's the Force. Like, God wants us to do this.
No, that's what I'm saying. They use the Force it's God. This is God's message. This is what he wants. And this just replace God with the Force. They're saying the exact same things, doing the exact same things in that manner. And it just seems like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So,
but more power to them. I I mean, he's slept with other people in the book already, right? We had, what was it, back on
In
Valo?
was it the Rising Storm?
It was in the Rising Storm. I think it was on Valo where he was like sleeping around with people too. But I mean, that felt like it was just kind of primal and, man sowing his seed kind of thing. That's at least how he kind of shrugged it off. There was no attachment. I think it was like a reporter or something at the time. So not uncommon that they're doing this in this era, but the fact that we got 2 Jedi now that are doing it and they've done it is kind of a big deal. And
they're making all these grandiose statements about the Force wants them to be together for their love and for the light, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, no, they've got a lot of stuff tied up in it. Yep.
Well, they did it. All right, that's chapter 53. If you want to go back and read that one, it's actually a really good chapter. And I mean, we've talked about how long we've been waiting this since Light of the Jedi, when it was first hinted that there was something there between them, and they finally did the deed. So, all right, let's move into chapter 55, and from here on out, this is kind of really where the book culminates. And so we go to Vixoseph 1, which is the planet where Marchion Ro is. He's up there by a mining colony. We learned that they were planting the Drengir seeds closer to mining colonies and where people were, so that they could feed once they came about. And he basically says, look, I want, to himself, I want to take the blight, and I want to weaponize it, and I want to use it and shape it. And he wants to use the Drengir as a mechanism to kind of populate it throughout the rest of the galaxy. I mean, he's going for like complete and utter, galaxy destruction, knowing that he's safe, but everybody else is going to be impacted and affected by the blight in some way. He does pick up the blight at one point, and tries to see if he can make it grow somewhere else. It does work. He's able to pick it up and move it and transplant it. And so that kind of gives him another theory that we'll talk about later down the road. Eventually, everybody shows up in Axiom, or an Axiom shows up in hyperspace, I should say, right outside Vixoseph 1. They see the Gaze Electric, which is Marchion Ro's ship. It takes off, so they were already ready. They already dropped him off and were getting ready to take off. And then once they come into orbit, they can sense the Nameless down below on the planet, right? They know that the Nameless are by there. And the plan is for Vern and Miro to kind of stay in the air, engage any ships that it might be out there, while Avar, Elzar, Burry, and Bell head down to the ground to go investigate and find Marchion Ro potentially and figure out what's going on there. And then Vern also notices that there's in the sky, they kind of fly ahead. They notice that there are Nihil ships that are shooting down at the ground. Later on, we come to find out that they're actually trying to corral these Drengir so that Marchion Ro can kind of do some experiments as well. So the Drengir are another component of what's going on Vixoseph 1. Let's see. Let's go into chapter 57. And this is where he sees the 5 vectors. So this is kind of like this chapter is really about what, we just kind of talked about what was going on with the Jedi. Now this is Marchion Ro's perspective, right? He saw those 5 ships come in, the 5 vectors come down from the main ship there. This is where Marta gets really excited, and she's like, I want you to attack the Jedi, like kill them in my name, right? This is everything I've stood for, everything I've wanted to do. And he sends one of the Nameless across the Blight to go confront the Jedi. That's where so they've got a Nameless coming right at them. So this is Elzar Mann and Avar and those guys. And so very dramatic in terms of where this thing ends, because you're thinking, oh my God, they're completely caught flat-footed, and they've got a Nameless crossing the Blight coming at them at that point. So anything you want to add in here? Because I'm just going to keep rolling on to what's going on with Vixoseph.
I mean, yeah, when they see that Nameless, I mean, when I read this for the first time, my first thought was like, oh God, like, I mean, Marchion has to be coming next, right? I feel like wherever the Nameless are, Marchion's there too. So
sure.
It makes me wonder if they were bracing themselves for that, but it seems like first they were just concerned about the Nameless and didn't really think about Marchion at the time.
Yeah. And so this is so in chapter 58, this is where Vern ends up firing on 2 of the Drengir. I mean, there's that whole battle going on, and I don't want to make light of that battle, but really the traumatic part here is you basically have Elzar Mann, Buryaga, and Avar Kriss feeling and reeling from the effects of the Nameless. I mean, there are moments, and you can, I'm just going to try to encapsulate what's going on here, because we do get a sense of where their fears are coming from. For Buryaga, it's right back to the cave, right in the ocean of Iram. I think for Elzar Mann, I'm trying to remember what his fear was that he went through, but we got a sense of his fear. and Avar's fear as well. But they're seeing like multiple versions of the Nameless. They can't tell how many there are. I think at one point, I remember it was Avar Kriss's was kind of about the Drengir, right? She was sensing the Drengir were everywhere, and it really wasn't a Drengir. It just turns out that's a Nameless. It was kind of feeding into their fears at that point. But they do a kind of interesting thing here, and this is what was kind of cut to the chase in terms of how they actually are able to defeat the Nameless. They end up, Buryaga starts to reach out to the Force, and he's lifted and inspired by Avar's song, first off, right? She's kind of that centerpiece. She is what keeps everybody there, even though, again, they are reeling and their powers really aren't as powerful because of what's happening and the effect of the Nameless. But Buryaga is able to kind of channel the fear, similar to what he did earlier on in the book. And then Avar Kriss is there to help him as well. And they kind of siphon the fear from Elzar Mann just long enough for him to kind of have clarity and be able to see like, oh my gosh, I'm not really, I mean, it hurts and I can still feel the fear, but it's not like, what was I say? Debilitating. Thank you. It's not as bad. And so he's able to ignite his lightsaber. Eventually he stabs the Nameless. And after he stabs the Nameless, it kind of plows through Avar, Kriss, and Buryaga and the tail of the Nameless, right? I think we mentioned that these are these cybernetic ones that Bulan has created. The tail, what I gathered was it impaled Avar Kriss on the like one part of her body, and really did a lot of damage to her. But nonetheless, Elzar Mann's blow was enough to kind of kill the Nameless. A very cool thing that they did here. I don't know how this translates into them fighting the Nameless, because it did take a lot out of them, honestly, throughout the entire time. It wasn't just something they could whip up and they did very easily. It was very, very difficult to have done, but it does feel like, there's progress that's been made. And I think we've been talking about this for a very long time. Is like, how do the Jedi defeat the Nameless? For the longest time, I thought it was going to be the RDC, or they'd come up with some ways for normal people, which they have been doing, right? I mean, the RDC kind of took front in Naboo, but I didn't think that the Jedi would find a way to at least have an impact on Nameless. Now, granted, this is only one, and we know there aren't many left, so maybe there's something there. But I don't know. Any thoughts around what was going on here, what the Jedi were experiencing, and do you see this something that can scale later on? Or is this even not a threat anymore? Because it feels like at the end of this book, yeah, the Nameless are still horrible, but it's just like the Drengir were long ago. Once the Drengir were over, we moved on to the Nameless. Now the Nameless are over. Feels like we're just moving on to the Blight. That's really the big scary bad now going forward.
Yeah, well, and so something I felt like that should be noted too is that the 4 Jedi that it takes to be able to defeat the Nameless, it almost seemed like it had to be these 4. Maybe not this exact combination of people, but it just came across that like not any Jedi could do it. And like with these 4, I mean, part of what made them successful was that, first of all, you had Buryaga with his skills with empathy kind of leading the group. And then you had Avar and Elzar, who had this strong connection with each other already, that I feel like kind of made it easier for Avar to kind of like take on Elzar's fear that he was feeling. So that way he was kind of freed up. And then you had Bell, who was kind of like that motivation for Buryaga, like he was earlier in the book, that like we talked about last week. So it felt like this combination of the 4 Jedi was kind of like a special combination. So I don't know if any Jedi would be able to pull this off.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it also seems like it would be kind of complicated to be like, okay, you 4 go out and defeat all the Nameless. Just go handle this real quick, because Avar like almost dies from it.
Yeah.
I mean, she barely escapes with her life. So while, yes, there is a way, and I think that progress is going to come from that way, it still seems like kind of complicated to be successful at it.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I hadn't considered that. Like, who else would have... I mean, okay, maybe you can make arguments that Yoda and Kisaka and all the other ones, the great ones, right? Soleil, they might have it's possible they could do something similar, but it is probably a very unique situation, and given the circumstances and the relationships they each have, that they were able to do this. By the way, Bell had left. I think he went to go jump into a ship or something and try to come back, and so that's why he wasn't around and present. But I should also mention here another interesting point. While this was going on, and before he felt, before they kind of siphoned the fear out of him so that he could actually take that shot or kill the Nameless with the lightsaber, there was a moment where he was ready to give into the dark side, right? Because he was already thinking about Avar Kriss, and he was thinking about, I need to protect her, I need her to live. And Avar squeezes his hand and snaps him out of it, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, that balance is there. It feels like as long as they're together, yeah, this is probably going to work. But you kick out. This is a two-legged table. You kick out one of it, the whole thing's coming down. Well, two legs wouldn't stand up anyways, but that's not the point. But there is a moment here where he does kind of go to the dark side. And it says, Elzar felt his terror tip into rage, into hate. It was right there. The power to destroy the Nameless first, if he chose. Lash out with the darkness, meet the monsters full on, destroy them, pour himself into them, an unending channel of the Force, a conflagration to make them feast until there was no more. It would be worth it to save Avar and Buri. So it felt like he almost had like a lucid moment there where, like, I can do this if I tap into the dark side. So I don't know. It's scary to think that he goes there so easily, but thankfully, again, Avar was there to kind of snap him back out of it, and they can come to his senses.
Yeah. Hopefully nothing happens to her. So she's not there to do that. But
yeah, because who's gonna bring him back? Nobody. Well, all that's going on. There is a moment here where Vern engages with Marchion Ro, and she jumps down. She pulls out her light whip. There's a Nameless nearby as well, though, so she can't really get too close. And what Marchion Ro is doing, he sends the Nameless eventually off to kind of bring back one of the Drengir. He wants to test what happens with the Drengir and if the Blight touches it. And this is part of what's going on. And right when, I think there's a moment there where the Nameless and the Drengir actually have a fight. And the Drengir actually kills the Nameless, which I thought was interesting. Of course, it's already dying. It's starting to calcify. So, it's kind of probably an even match of sorts. But when she goes in to try to kill it with her whip, Ro blocks it with his lightsaber, which is always kind of weird. He ends up backing off into the Blight. He takes some shots at her. She can't follow because she can't cross the Blight in any way. And it eventually ends up with him kind of reaching down. He grabs something off the ground. I think he throws a piece of the Blight at one of the Drengir as well. Mm-hmm. So we get to see, and he whatever that little experiment was that he was going for works. The Gaze Electric comes by, picks him up, and takes off. And that's kind of, we don't see him again until the very end of the book.
Why do you think he just let Vernestra go?
I was thinking about that. I think he says as much. Like at one point, he says something to the effect of like, yeah, she's here. I could probably take her, but that's really not what I'm here for. That's not the battle, right? He's got bigger plans. And I don't think he really wants. He's got the Gaze Electric here. The Gaze Electric is just picking off these RDC ships left and right too. So he's got all the firepower. He has the upper hand. He could certainly take it. But I think for him, he was really committed to coming down to this planet, figuring out these last two experiments, testing out his hypothesis in terms of what happens with the Blight. And he's got bigger fish to fry. He's got a deal now to make when he gets to Coruscant, which is ultimately what he wants to do. But I think he just kind of brushed it off as like, I don't really need to have this battle. I mean, I've got 5 lightsabers already. I don't need Jedi Force users anymore for anything. I'm safe. I'll get away.
I guess he's grown past the need to just be picking off individual Jedi.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she's easy killing at this point. I mean, I don't know how she would have. I mean, we didn't really talk about it, but I mean, she crashes her vector. Right. I think at one point she has a moment where the Drengir attack her vector and they wrap vines around it and she's trying to fly away from it and eventually just ends up crashing. It sets one of the Drengir on fire, I think, at some point. So she really didn't have any way to escape, and she's trapped there, with the Blight nearby, so she can't cross the Blight. The Gaze Electric is flying above them. She has no other support anywhere around her. I mean, the RDC ships are there, but they're getting blown away as well. So it would have been a very, very easy kill for him. But, I think it was just kind of one of these villainous moments where they're like, you're small potatoes and, wait till you see what I do next kind of thing, and just walked away. So I don't know. I don't really have a good explanation other than that, but
that was kind of what I came up with too.
Yeah. So great stuff in all of this. Of course, this takes us, this is pretty much, we've summarized chapters, I don't even know, 58 all the way up to like 60, 61, I think. I'm just trying
Yeah,
to get caught up here.
61.
Yeah. And there's in 61, just kind of the last bit of it here. Back to Avar, Kriss, Elzar, Mann. You know, Avar is, you know, near death at this point. Elzar, by the way, he stabs it. I forgot to mention he does he finally does decapitate the Nameless as well. Cuts the head off of it. And right when that happens, Avar crashes, and he catches her. He's got her in her arms, and then Burryaga comes around. He kind of hugs them both. But it's very clear that Avar, Kriss, I mean, I honestly, the first read, I thought she's not going to make it. Like, this is the end. This is going to be where she dies, because she's badly wounded from the Nameless cyborg tail and the spikes that went through her. On top of that, she's completely drained from all the exertion of the force that she used, the effects of whatever the Nameless was doing to her. On top of that, it, you know, weakened her. And I thought, wow, this is how she goes. And, you know, maybe valiant, but I was a little worried there. I didn't think she was going to make it out of here, honestly.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised if she didn't. I mean, especially because it feels like that's inevitably where we're headed. I guess we're just not headed there quite yet.
Not yet. Not yet. There's a quick moment here on Coruscant where Ro calls Gira and he tells her, hey, I'm coming to Coruscant to deliver a message. Gira then goes to So and says, hey, Marchion Ro is coming to Coruscant, and he expects to be greeted, or she asks him, does he expect to be greeted as anything other than a prisoner of war, or prisoner of war? So it's, you know, her senses are pretty high. The anxiety's high, knowing that Marchion Ro is going to come here. The way they treat him, by the way, is interesting. How formal everybody gets here. But more on that here in just a second. There's a quick moment there where Vern and Bell both deduce that the Drengir can sense the blight before they can actually see it. And Burry starts to wonder, you know, if there was an emotion that was charged to the blight the way fear radiated off the Nameless, which I thought was an interesting concept, right? He can sense the Drengir, or he can sense the Nameless because of the fear that emanates, but he's trying to think, is there emotion, an emotion that comes off the blight itself? And the one that comes to mind, he says it's not hunger, it's not longing, but it's homesick. So the blight is homesick. Again, this is kind of leading us to think that maybe it's just because it's, you know, far from Planet X, it needs to go back to that planet at some point. That was my interpretation of it, but he does call it a wound in the Force, which I thought was an interesting thing as well, because that was something that came from Legends many years ago with Nihilus, but another usage, or another use of that term, wound in the Force, I thought was kind of cool as well. But all right, anything else before we get to Avar and then finally to the final chapter, chapter 65?
I mean, I think that covers it. Yeah, let's do.
So Avar lives, right? Thankfully. She wakes up and Elzar is sitting there holding her hand. They're on the Axiom. Elzar tells her that Ro is coming to Coruscant in 3 hours, and they're on the way right now. And this is, and the big moment here is he finally says, I love you, right? He says, he finally, you know, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but when she said it to him, he didn't say anything. He ran off, scared, completely confused about what to do, what to say. And at this point, you know, spending now, having gone through what they've gone through, of course, in the bedroom with the Nameless, and just the experience of it all, and having there being at, you know, her side as she was nearly at death's door, was enough for him to kind of realize, okay, I do love her and it's okay to say it. And so he does say it back to her. So
they've kind of seen it all at this point.
Yeah.
When he said it, it kind of was like, okay, well, we know that. So
yeah,
it wasn't really such a big deal anymore.
Yeah. And I can't remember, like, I know she was just coming to, but it didn't seem like, I think she kind of knew it too. Like, I think that in her mind, it was like, okay, I knew this and I'm just, you know, glad he finally said it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, last chapter, chapter 65. And so Marchion Ro is coming to Coruscant, and everybody is there ready to greet him. They've got Lena So, she's got her Targons. I love the fact that she said that she didn't get dressed up in like royal gowns or any of that stuff. She was just like, no, this person doesn't deserve it. I'm not going to, you know, come across as like, you know, give him any more than he needs or wants.
It's not going to make a difference.
Nope. But nonetheless, she is there. She's waiting there in front of the Senate building. You've got Yoda, Rikasaka is there, Soleagra is there. So those are 3 prominent members of the Jedi High Council at the time. They've shown up. I think they said Yoda was falling asleep, by the way, which seems, you know, appropriate. But I'm sure he was just meditating. But you never know with that guy. Of course, Elzar Mann is there. Avar, Kriss are there. They were flirting still. Oh my God, these kids, stop touching each other. They're sitting there flirting while this is going on.
I mean, and Markion Rowe is coming.
Yeah.
And they're doing that.
Yeah. They're kids.
No decorum.
They're
Like,
they're
you should be saying your prayers right now.
Exactly. We're, repenting in some way.
Yeah.
Girastaros is there, awaiting, of course, as kind of that emissary, or I don't know what her official title was with the Nihil, but eventually the gaze, shows up, it comes down, and the minute it gets close, they feel very, uneasy because they can tell that Markion Rowe has Nameless on the gaze electric. In fact, he comes out, and he's flanked by a couple of them as well. I know we've talked about this, I do want to see the Targons fight the Nameless. I just want to see it, because they're not force sensitive, and they certainly can tear crap apart. Ever since the Rising Storm, I've wanted to see these things fight. And they had a moment there in the Rising Storm where they were kind of defending Lena So, right? But ever since the Nameless came about, I was like, oh my gosh, that's going to be like the battle royale. I really hope they do that.
If anything happens to the Targons, though, I'm going to be mad.
No, I think they'll come out. One of them says they're teasing it, and then he says the big Pokemon battle.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I just need no more animals to be harmed in this story.
Maybe she loses one. I can't see them both coming out, but
no, they can't both.
But
no,
what if one dies protecting Lena So, or maybe her son or something like that?
They wasted their animals dying cards on a couple of dumb things, in my opinion. So no more animals can die.
Okay.
No more pets can be harmed or threatened.
I almost feel bad for the Nameless dying now, though, too, given what we know about them. So
well, and I do too. I think that's one thing that this book did well, is kind of presenting the Nameless are also a victim of the Nihil too. Even though the Nameless have done all these horrible things, it's kind of sad what's being done. And there's been hints dropped in other places, but I feel like this book, seeing it through Burryaga's eyes, it kind of just drove it home a little bit more.
Yeah. Markion Rowe. So he comes out again. He's got his Nameless there, his Pokemon with him, and he's dressed in white and gold robe, or white and gold clothing, which I thought was kind of what an a-hole for him to do, to wear that. I mean, he did that on purpose.
You may not wear your royal clothes, but I'm wearing mine. I'm gonna look good.
Yeah. Kind of crazy. I think he was shirtless too, wasn't he? Anyways, he had he was wearing the bandolier across his chest, and it had 5 lightsabers on there as well. So he's just the biggest a-hole in the world that he's coming out, because he is so arrogant, and he has every right to be, given what he's about to do. Nonetheless, he comes out. He's holding the rod in one hand, and he's holding some white petals in the other. Man, when the first time I read that and I heard he had the white petals or the white flowers, I was like, I know exactly what this jerk's going to do. And sure enough, he did it. But he comes out, and he's talking about the blight here. He says, Chancellor, you have your reasons to mistrust my intentions, but I come today because of a greater threat to us all. It destroys everything, consumes everything. I have studied it, and you should believe me when I tell you that no being is safe, neither Republic nor Nihil, not even the Hutts or Takadana mercenaries, they had to bring that in there, or Mandalorians, except me. I know how to stop it. And then he says, and this is where he kind of spreads his hands open. He's got one hand out with the rod, the flowers in the other hand. Says, more important, I will stop it. And Elzar asks if, because there is an if, right? And I love that Lena So was thinking the same thing, right? They know that this is not going to come freely. There's going to be a but here, if you will. But he says, no if, I don't think you understand yet. And the rest of that passage, and this is kind of where it ends, the Chancellor did not want to play this game, and she refused to ask what it was they did not understand yet, right? She wasn't even going to try to give in to what he was saying there. Rowe held her gaze, his smile twisting in amusement. He understood and simply held out the white flowers. He tipped his hand, and they fell from his palm. He said, that I am your only hope. He responds back, that I am your only hope. The wildflowers drifted down as light as the petals they were, disintegrated into ash, lost to the morning breeze. And so I don't know, my interpretation of this was that he was spreading the blight on Coruscant.
So
And here's where I'll poke holes in that theory, because it's not clear. It's not 100% clear. Where I can see holes in that theory is that the flowers, when they hit, they broke into ash. And so it felt like maybe they were already dead. But why would he come to Coruscant, right? what has he got to do other than if he does lay the blight down and start the spread of the blight on Coruscant, he now holds a lot of power to say, look, you want me to stop it? I'll stop it, but you're going to meet my demands kind of thing, right? Otherwise, I don't know what his intent is to be there. Like, what is he going to gain from all that? What did you think? Sorry, how did you interpret that?
Yeah, so I kind of went back and forth because, okay, yes, based on what he was doing earlier, it sounds like that is how the blight spreads, is you have a piece of the blight and then put it somewhere else. But the thing that made me be like, maybe that's not what's happening is because it just seems like such a massive thing to do. Like, just like I'm just thinking about this from like a storytelling perspective, having the blight affect Coruscant and just like destroy all of Coruscant, like that seems like insane. Like, how are we even going to come back from that? It almost seems like too big of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of made me be like, okay, maybe that's not what they're doing, because that just seems like so completely bonkers about like, how are they going to handle this? What are they going to do? They don't know anything about the blight and now it's on Coruscant.
Yeah.
To me, that I just felt like, okay, maybe that's not what they're doing, because that would almost be too crazy to like try to resolve all that now. So I don't know. I kind of went back and forth.
No, here, look at what he says is, that's how I saw it. It'll spread slowly on a planet made of mostly metal and cement, though. And so and they do talk about that, right? Remember when he was experimenting, there was some, earlier on, he was experimenting on different materials, and eventually the blight would take over stuff like that, but it took a lot longer to take over those types of things. And so that would be a way to like, okay, it's not going to just spread across Coruscant and suddenly they're going to have to try to resolve that, by the time we get to, the Acolyte, I guess, at this point. But it is enough for it to start. And, if it starts to spread slowly on Coruscant, they can't touch it, right? They can't go near it. They don't want to do anything with it. And so they are going to have to talk to Roe, and they're going to have to negotiate and give into at least whatever he wants next. God knows what that guy wants at this point, right? Now that he's on Coruscant, I have no idea what this guy, truly wants. But, it does feel like, that he's got the cards in his hand. He's already established like this thing, no one's safe, right? That whole speech was intentional, to paint this doomsday picture of this is the reality and you have no control over any of it. Only I do. And so here I am spreading the blight around on Coruscant. And my guess is he's probably done it to other planets too. Like he may have gone around and already had it seeded with the Drengir or split around and comes back and says, okay, it's on your Coruscant, but I put some on Hosnian Prime and I put some on Tatooine. I don't know, just because I hate that planet. Whatever, right? Maybe he spread it out to a whole bunch of other planets now too. And so the Jedi have a real predicament here. They've got to figure out, like, what do we do? How do we combat this? And they don't have a real reason or a real solution other than giving in to Marchion Ro and say, okay, please, we'll meet your demands. Just stop it from where what's going on. Eventually, I think they will find something else, whether it's the efforts of Buryaga. Maybe they go back to Oene or whatever that planet was, and they figure out a way there. I mean, it feels like that's where they're going to go, because they put so much time and effort into this book to talk about those species and how they had that symbiotic relationship with the trees, and it just feels like maybe there's something there that they're going to be able to gather in mind. It's going to be Buryaga and Bell would be my guess, but it does leave a very interesting predicament for the Jedi at this point, because they are helpless. Once again, they are helpless to do anything and just allow Marchion Ro to do whatever he wants.
I mean, there's got to be a weakness. This is one thing that's kind of driving me crazy about Marchion Ro, is I'm like, there has to be a weakness. We haven't really seen one other than him just being selfish.
Weakness to the blight, you mean?
A weakness to Marchion and his
Ro.
plans. Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't really have one. I mean, nothing that's been exposed.
How are we gonna? I just always am wondering, how are we gonna wrap this up by the end of phase 3 if we still haven't seen a weakness from Marchion? We don't know very much about the blight. We just now have a way to defeat the Nameless, which is difficult but possible.
How would you feel if the Drengir took sides with the Jedi?
I think that'd be cool.
You remember in the comic book, they sided with the dark side, with the Sith, years ago, like eons ago or centuries ago or whatever. But what if they came together and said, look, we're all in this together, to quote High School Musical. We're all in this together because you're dark side, we're light side, we're both at risk here. I don't know, maybe they can do something. I don't know. Maybe they contact the great progenitor and like, hey, we need your help. kind of thing.
I could see that. I feel like the Edge of Balance also, like the most recent, I won't say any spoilers, but I feel like the most recent Edge of Balance kind of hints at that too. So
Which I've not read,
maybe,
so I'm
yeah, maybe it just came out. But yeah, I mean, maybe they are kind of going in that direction, especially because, why else bring the Drengir back if they're not going to play some kind of a important role? Why go through the
yeah.
trouble of bringing them back if
I mean,
not?
yeah, outside of the experiments, which again, I get why he was doing that, but it feels like there's much more there for the Drengir to bring them back after, what happened to them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just hope we start getting some more concrete answers soon, which I'm sure we probably will, but because I mean, we've got to get this wrapped up somehow with answers to all of these questions, and we're still getting more questions raised. So,
Yeah. But overall, I mean, to kind of wrap this up. Oh, sorry. He says one up says he changed the home key to something Vern has, which I think is true, right? What's her name?
Mari.
Mari Santeca likely gave the home key, or she gave the key to her as well. So Vern is probably the only one that knows that. So that'll at least get him to the storm wall, right? Again, because that's still up, right? At the end of this book, it's still back up. They don't have a way to break it outside of Vern and Avar Kriss. And then there's also the third Echo Stone out there as well. So that's probably going to be, what's his name? I'm trying to think of his name now. Sorry, it's late. But there are other Jedi that are out there doing research. Who's the little bookworm kid?
Silas.
Rhys Silas, thank you. I was going to call him Silas, and I'm like, that's not his name.
When you said
Rhys Silas.
research, I realized who you meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's
researcher.
there are other people out there that are still doing research and trying to figure out like how do we break all this stuff and get all that. So.
And we also have Aslan Rel still out there too. So
yeah,
we're gonna probably he's probably part of the solution as well.
He's likely the person that gets us back to Planet X or part of it, right? But
yeah.
Which, by the way, was interesting. He came up in the Star Wars 50th issue comic. I don't know if you heard our breakdown or if you read the comic, Lauren, but he does pop up in there. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. I won't spoil anything. Go watch the
across.
breakdown we did, but it is kind of cool that he came up in there as well. So there's a reason why, and there's a very good reason why he comes up in that comic, and it explains one of the things that he did to try to stop the Nameless. And it's very cool. So go read it or go watch the breakdown Jonesy and I did just recently. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, overall, like, again, I know we talked about this at the very beginning of the last episode. I really enjoyed the book. I thought Tessa Gratton did an amazing job. Very, very pleasantly surprised. And I only say that because I wasn't sure what to expect. And I thought Eye of Darkness was such a solid book, and George Mann really knocked it out of the park that I'm like, wow, are we going to really get back-to-back books here? And yeah, definitely felt that way for this book. So really great concepts, good stuff that came out with Marky and Rowe. We got a lot more information about the Blight, even though we don't know a whole lot about it. It was nice to finally get some more information. I think that'll continue to trickle in over the next wave of books. But you're right. I think the only concern that I have is like we only have one more adult novel, and I think we have 2 mid-grades coming up. And outside of that, I don't know that we have a whole lot left. And so we've got to wrap up all of this stuff in there. So hopefully, was it Trials of the Jedi? What's the last book called?
I believe it's Trials.
It's Charles Soule's book, right?
Yeah.
I hope that's like 1,000 pages at least.
Oh my
to
gosh.
wrap all this up, because I don't know how we're going to get through it all, to be honest. But
I mean, I'm glad
stuff.
we made a lot of progress in this book, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, even though we still have a lot of questions, we still did make a significant amount of progress by the end of Temptation of the Force. So that's good. So hopefully we can keep that pace going.
Yeah. And I do suspect that we'll see the rest of Porter Engle and General Vice's story carried over in the comic. They could put it in the book, but I mean, with everything else that's going on, I don't know if it makes the most sense. And honestly, I would like to visually see that again, because I did really enjoy the Blade in that comic. So it would be kind of cool for them to pick it up there.
And since we do know another Porter comic is coming, it would make sense for that to be what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I don't know. I forget now, honestly. I don't remember where that takes place, if that's going to be a phase 2 thing or if that's something that comes up. Maybe it's picking up this story. I don't know. I don't remember now.
It's teased at the end of the Blade, but I don't think we have any confirmation yet as to like what exactly, like if it's going to be part of phase 3, if it's going to be its own thing. Like, I don't think we know that yet.
Okay. Either way, they can give me all the Porter Engle stories. I'm here for them. So,
Same. Yeah. Agreed.
Great character. All right, before we wrap up, how about saying thank you to some of the folks that joined us in the live stream tonight?
Yes, so thank y'all for joining us. Tonight we had One Up for CPU, Starf, Riley, Millennium Workshop, Skywalker's Academy, and My Star Wars Guys.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming out. If you guys are interested and haven't already done so, head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube, subscribe there. Like this video if you don't mind, and please leave us comments, questions, theories. Want to hear it all. Put it out there so we can see it, and we'll try to comment and give you feedback on that as well. This weekend, I think you and I are back on Sunday night. Is that right? We're going to be covering the High Republic?
Yes.
Yes. The High Republic, we're going the main flagship High Republic comic book by Kevin Scott. We're going to be covering the last issues before it stops and picks up again in 2025. And then if I can get my stuff together, Jonesy and I are going to do this kind of high concept breakdown of A New Hope. So we're going to take the movie A New Hope. We're going to make it into a television series. We'll have a beginning and an end. And then we're going to rate and grade each of the episodes on a scale of like 1 to 10, how we thought they would play out. That's a Patreon exclusive only. So if you're a Patreon member, that'll be coming to you either in audio or video, depending on your tier. Oh, and by the way, tomorrow, holy crap, tomorrow, I'll be back on here with Jonesy as well, because we're going to do Ahsoka 1 year later. So that's our kind of retrospective look on Ahsoka, and just talk about the impact that it's made over the last year, what stuff has changed for us, how do we feel about certain things, and what does that look like now that we know that season 2 of Ahsoka had started filming just recently, or in the last 30, 60 days or so. So that'll be a lot of fun to talk about that, because that was one of my favorite series. I really did enjoy that quite a bit. All right, Lauren, any final words before we get out of here?
I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for being with us, and we'll see you all here tomorrow.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.